All right, AP language friends. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how my templates can be incorporated or manipulated to construct FRQ1 from the 2022 exam. And one of the things I often talk about with regards to my templates is this idea that they really can demystify expository writing for our students. What students do in FRQ1 is almost identical to what they're going to be doing in FRQ2 and FRQ3. So quite literally, one set of templates can be used uniformly across the expository modes. And at my school, I get kids their junior year in Lang, and then they graduate up their senior year and take Lit. And what happens is they're like, holy cow, you can write all 6 FRQs the exact same way. You can declare or invert the thesis, which is the template for the introductory paragraph, and all body paragraphs you tackle syllogistically. So basically, the students just need to figure out which expository mode they are being tasked to write. So whether it be literary analysis, which is, AP literature, obviously, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research. And once they got their head around that, half the battle is won. They should intuitively, instinctually know how to approach the writing aspect of the prompt through practice and repetition. So in this particular writing workshop, I'm going to do nothing different. I'm going to keep it to the status quo. We'll first take a look at the prompt and then, get our heads around that. And then I have a bunch of models and exemplars to show you how to do the declarative and the inverted thesis. And then we'll build the body paragraph syllogistically, as I hinted at before. So let's jump right in. First things first, the thing I always say at the start of every writing workshop is the following idea. So I'm writing a textbook and it's around this essential question. What if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? I think there's a fundamental difference between the assigning of writing and the explicit teaching of it. So imagine if Bob Ross comes onto the screen and says, "Hello, happy little people. Today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage. And in the center of our canvas, we're going to include a New England wood-covered bridge." So if you were to sit there and just talk about theory and technique of how to paint wood-covered bridges and autumnal landscapes and passed out a graphic organizer. This painter, me specifically, me as a student in Bob Ross's class, would struggle with that. I do best when he gets to the easel, to the canvas, and walks me through step by step how to manipulate his template. He called it a heuristic, which is known as the wet on wet technique. Every single time Bob Ross ever painted, he always used the wet on wet technique, and I can approximate what he's doing. I'm learning from the expert. So that's what I always encourage English teachers that I work with to do. Position yourself as the expert in the classroom. You're the expert writer, and give models and exemplars with your students. And I think the big kicker is give your kid a template. Give them some kind of heuristic to manipulate and to bend and mold their thinking with. So whether it be my template or someone else's template, templates really work, and they're a good guardrail and a good scaffold while students are learning to write independently. So enough of that. Here's the prompt. And here it is. Since the early 2000s, the United States government and a number of corporations have sponsored initiatives to improve education in the STEM disciplines, which are science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The emphasis on STEM subjects in elementary, secondary, and higher education reflects concerns that United States students are less proficient in these areas than are students in other countries. Additionally, there is a belief that mastery in STEM fields is now essential in order to join a highly technical and specialized workforce. However, not everyone is convinced that a STEM-focused curriculum is necessary and or effective. So with all prompts, we're basically going to have to, get our heads to a yes, a no, or a maybe. It depends. That's the rhetorical, stance we're going to have to take on this. So here's the ultimate essential question. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the value, if any, of initiatives to improve STEM education and increase the number of students interested in the STEM disciplines. Pretty straightforward, right? This is, average run-of-the-mill type of thing. And I know my students came back and felt very confident with regards to this. I thought this was a very fair prompt, considering some of the tricks and pitfalls and snafus and curveballs the College Board has thrown at the kids in past years. So straight up, let's dive right in. So the question immediately is, how do I write the introductory paragraph? And as I alluded to earlier, we can declare or invert. Let's unpack what I mean by that. So when you declare a thesis, you're going to begin with the thesis. Just boom, out of the gate, drop your position on STEM education. So, you're all in, you're against it, or you're going to qualify it. So just out of the gate, as succinctly, concisely, precisely as possible, boom, drop the thesis. From there, you're going to sprinkle in a little bit of context and background. One thing that I like to see, especially given their audience, is some tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. And ultimately, I've been doing a lot of teaching on this as of late. You don't want to be, a pretentious goon, in writing. You don't want to sound contrived. Kids need to stay in their wheelhouse. So don't overdo the tier 2. It's really nice to have a teeter-totter balance between the colloquial, the vernacular, and the tier 2 academic in terms of exercising voice. The other thing that I like to see sprinkled in the introduction and throughout the essay is a wide variety of sentence constructs. Many of you are familiar with my work and know that I wrap my arms around the idea that Strunk and White espouse the theory that there's 12 different ways to construct a single sentence. So you'll see my students wield a wide variety of sentence constructs and have an ability to manipulate their syntax to avoid what struggling and emerging writers typically do in terms of overuse the short, simple declarative sentence. So there'll be good sentence variety in this, good syntactical manipulations, and then the kicker is this. The introduction is going to be exactly 4 sentences long, no more, no less. So it's thesis, context, background. And then you got to go for that voice point, the pizzazz, the flair. So that good teeter-totter balance of tier 2 academic, colloquial, vernacular. Bust out some sentence constructs for voice, rhythm, and flow. Exactly 4 sentences. So you can flip that over on its head and invert the thesis. And in this case, you end with the thesis. So a student might start with a hook or an analogy. They may begin with the context in the background. The rest is pretty staple. Tier 2 sentence constructs, exactly 4 sentences. So I'll give you a few examples to demonstrate what my students did on the exam. So here's example number 1. Since its inception, STEM initiatives have crossed the desk of 5 U.S. presidents. So as of yet, we have not taken a stance, right? We've not answered, in a sense, the essential question. So I'm going to anticipate that this is inverted, and the last sentence is going to have contain the thesis statement. In other words, these measures have had nearly 2 decades and countless taxpayer dollars to take root and advance profound change. But the reality is this: nothing has really changed. Given that American students are still leagues behind their international counterparts in the STEM disciplines, a continuance in funding such programs lacks common sense. Do you see how that last sentence answers the essential question in the prompt, like implicit in the prompt? So the prompt doesn't necessarily, you don't see a question mark in the prompt, but students are being asked a question. Take a stance, right, on the STEM discipline and the continuance in funding of STEM programs. And the student did a nice job of taking a stand in either direction with regards to that. So it's really nice. The sentence constructs are very varied. Really good manipulation of the sentences. I like that, but the reality is this: hyphen, nothing has really changed. And then look at what follows that, the complexity of the sentence that follows that. The vocabulary is really nice. Tier 2 words like inception, initiatives, profound is even nice. International counterparts, continuance, right? So the kid is within his wheelhouse. It doesn't sound like a pretentious, over the top stuffed suit professor, so they're in their wheelhouse. But it also has this nice colloquial and vernacular mix too, like cross the desk. I really like that. Just sort of some casual diction. Take a root in advance, profound change, leagues behind, right? So some hipster, I call it, your inner hipster. Be 16, be 17, but be your best academic self. So that one is a well executed inverted thesis. Here's another one. The American educational system needs to make a decision as to whether or not it is producing a national workforce that are soulless automatons or a nation of well-rounded independent thinkers. So we haven't answered the essential question yet, but the student has pretty much shown their hand based on the diction. STEM in and of itself is inadequate. To be a fully functioning member of society, one needs direct and specific training in other things such as the arts, soft skills, and basic common sense, things that curriculums often overlook. For STEM to make a significant social impact, other disciplines will need to be included. So the answer to the essential question is coming last. So my students came back and reported that most of them inverted the thesis. They just found that they needed to have a little bit of context and background before they could drop the thesis. And I found in reading the anchor papers that students that inverted tended to have more skillful, artful introductions and theses than the students that just out of the gate, boom, answered the essential question and walked away. That's just kind of my observation. But same things going here. You got your sentence constructs are varied. The syntax is manipulated. Vocab is up there, but in the wheelhouse. Good teeter-totter balance of the colloquial, the vernacular, the academic, and a clearly articulated thesis statement, all housed in 4 sentences. Here's another one. Different student, same template. The acronym of STEM is missing some crucial letters from the alphabet. First, in order to create a world-class workforce, one needs to include the letters LAE, liberal arts education. Second, given that the whole student must be educated, the letters SEL must also be added, social emotional learning. Initiatives to improve STEM are needed, but they need to be done sensibly and with the best intentions of the nation and individual in mind. I love this one a lot because I tell my students this. The directions are clear. Your argument must be central, right? The College Board is very clear in stating that. And I tell my students, read the sources and say something original. Like, don't regurgitate something that you've read. Don't regurgitate a thesis that is contained in the 6 sources. Come up with something really authentic to say. And none of the sources are talking about social emotional learning or necessarily the importance of liberal arts education, kind of on a parallel cursory level. I think it was the third source talks about liberal arts education, but doesn't go it doesn't take a deep dive into it. So there's plenty in the six sources to support and defend such a thesis. So this is excellent, all done the same way, right? Tier 2, sentence constructs, 4 sentences, all balanced out. And one last one. To be a world leader, there needs to be a greater focus on STEM education. So, all right, this one seems to be declaring. Let's see where they go. Clearly, the American educational system is lagging in many areas, but neglecting to shore up its most vital workforce would be a costly error both politically and economically. What the world needs right now is specialization, not loosey-goosey training in disciplines that hold no pragmatic value. The world is in peril right now, and STEM initiatives are clearly a perfect panacea. So very cool. I like this example a lot because, how often does a kid get to say loosey-goosey in an essay? And this is what I teach my students. Like you're 15, you're 16, you're 17. Write your best academic self, but be you. So I encourage my students to bust out a little colloquial and vernacular, but you have to throw it on the teeter-totter balance with words like panacea, pragmatic, you know. Otherwise it's not going to work. It's going to sound too sophomoric. So this one is really nice. And, in terms of ascending the rubric into that 5-6 territory, I really think that students need to flex their voice muscle in this direction. And it really doesn't matter. So you can declare, you can invert 4 sentences. I really like the sentence constructs in this one. The second sentence in particular is very cool. Clearly, comma, areas, hyphen, right? So all the sentences are very varied and have good voice rhythm and flow. So that's how we tackle introductions with my template of the declarative and inverted thesis. So the question becomes, how do I write the body paragraphs? And the answer is always this: you're going to proceed syllogistically. So in other videos in my YouTube channel, I have deep dives into the syllogistic method, its history, its theory, its technique. And for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to give sort of a cursory overview of it. And if you want a deeper lesson, then just go drudging through my YouTube channel and check out those videos. But in brief, the syllogistic method comes from Aristotle. It's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. He ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich, town kids would go to the Lyceum to learn about polemics, oration, debate, wordsmithing, word wrangling, and then, of course, the maths and the sciences. And some of you might be familiar with texts like Plato's Republic, in which students are thrown the question, what is justice? And it's really interesting because Aristotle, Plato and Socrates and all of that, that generation of philosophers are doing what our students are doing. They were grappling with essential questions. So what is justice? And this great philosophical think tanker would step to the mic and drop his definition of justice and say, ta-da, got it. And then the other boys would gather around and they would tear apart that definition of justice and find the holes in the logic. And someone else would come to the mic and drop a new definition. And that's pretty much Plato's Republic, is finding the logical holes in each person's definition. And each definition proceeded syllogistically. And what Aristotle was going for is what we always talk about, line of reasoning. I call it cogency. I say that to my students all the time. Be cogent in your arguments. Have a line of reasoning. So be mathematical, be computative. So a syllogism is basically a mathematical computative formula where you proceed from premise to conclusion. So here's an example. If I were to say arsenic is deadly in my first premise, and in my second premise follow it up by my dog ate arsenic, and conclude my dog is going to die, we all would agree like that's perfectly clear, lucid logic, Christian. Like that makes a whole bunch of sense. And when our students write or argue, we want them to be that precise and that locked in logically. But what happens is this: most of our students, especially in synthesis, start with the second premise. They begin by regurgitating somebody else's argument, or they immediately begin to summarize the sources, and it reads like a cliff note summation of 6 sources, and they're not arguing. And we have to keep in mind that rule: your argument must be central. So in terms of what the template looks like for the purposes of constructing synthesis, this is what each body paragraph must do. So within the body paragraph, you're going to have a first premise, a second premise, and a conclusion. And I really want to emphasize that a body paragraph has a conclusion. So the first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. In the thesis, we just took a stance, right? So we said yes, no, maybe, it depends. So why should we have STEM funding? Why should we not have a continuance of STEM funding? Why are you qualifying? Right? So you got to get into your why reason. And I'm going to model this in a second. The first premise is always going to be 3 sentences long to keep the argument central. I don't want my students getting into the sources any sooner than the 4th sentence unless they have a reason, right, that they can support, qualify, and defend their reason. So really set up that why argument. The second premise is going to be the teeter-totter balance between quoting and paraphrasing. You don't want to do one more at the expense of the other. And it's the textual support. So we know that they are required to use a said amount of sources in their paper. So we got to make sure that that happens. And then the conclusion of the syllogistic body paragraph is going to be the textual analysis. I always tell my students that the first premise is a promise. You got to come back and shake hands with your brother and say, I kept my promise. So I promised you that I was going to talk about A, B, and C, and that's all I talked about. I didn't bring in anything extraneous, and I thoroughly have support and analysis for A, B, and C. Smart students ask good questions, and they say, Mr. Kuhn, we're using templates, and in your template for the introductory paragraph, it's 4 sentences long. How long should a syllogistic body paragraph be? And I tell them, you're shooting for 10 sentences, don't exceed 12. So those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence body paragraphs that we often see in synthesis writing, well, in any writing, just don't have enough support and analysis to really hold water. So to synthesize the sources, to keep the argument central, and to have a real good solid line of reasoning, I say 10 sentences. So here's a sample first premise. As I said earlier, it should be 3 sentences long. And I put a training wheel on this early in the academic year that I'll show you in case you're beginning your academic year this way, or you're just introducing your students to my templates. So it has to be 3 sentences long, and their little gimmick, like the guardrail for this, is if the student says reason why, they will state a reason why. For whatever the reason, students have a hard time making arguments that contain a why reason. So I just tell them, listen, all right, for training wheel purposes, just say reason why, and have that reason why be your anchor, your foothold for the line of reasoning. So look at how I modeled this for the students. One reason why STEM initiatives have faltered is because they have not dangled the proverbial carrot in front of students' noses. In order for these measures to really recognize their full potential, there must be initiatives like free college tuition and job placement guarantees. Otherwise, people will not buy in, as is evidenced over the last 20 years. Right? So that's a clear reason why. Right? And I often tell my students, put your first premise in the language of a promise when I'm when I'm doing writing conferences with them. So I would say, all right, Jason, Todd, Katrina, put this in the language of a promise, right? So ultimately what we would expect here is, talking about that carrot measure that people, students need incentives, and like things like job guarantees and free tuition, job placements, and the whole body paragraph should be about that. Nothing extraneous should come in if we're going to sustain the line of reasoning. So let me show you a full body paragraph. It goes on 2 slides. So I'll walk you through the whole thing. So first 3 sentences set up the why reason. And at the end of the 3rd sentence, be ready to articulate it in the language of a promise. If STEM-focused curriculum does not inherit a few more vowels and consonants, there's no reason why an institution should continue to pursue it as an initiative. Standing alone, the acronym clearly does not meet the diverse needs of the total student. 20 years of evidence supports this fact. So 3 sentences. If this is going to be put into a promise, I'm expecting that the student is going to be talking about adding other acronyms, vowels, consonants to STEM. So I'm going back to the thesis we read about adding SEL and liberal arts education. I'm thinking it might be that student's paper. It would tie to that. In the 4th sentence, you immediately get into the sources. And I tell my students, start paraphrasing or quoting immediately in the 4th sentence. So I say, in terms of prioritizing, what's the best quote? What's the best paraphrase to link to the promise of your first premise? So look at where this goes. Gary May concurs in that he would like to see an A added to STEM, with the A standing for arts. So that comes from source F. That's a really good quote right there. Just a simple A. That's like the big paraphrased idea. So sometimes students just like doggedly quote these gargantuan statements from the sources. You don't need to do it, right? And it's not eloquent. It's not skillful writing. So we quote, we analyze, keep it all underneath the umbrella concept of the first premise. Ironically, policymakers on the opposing side of the argument quickly forget the fact that their liberal arts education played a huge role in their success. All right, so cool. We got considering the opposition. That's nice. We got to do that. While the likes of Marco Rubio are bluntly calling for more welders and fewer philosophers, he, as well as others, neglect to see that the undergraduate able to cobble together a course schedule integrating STEM and the humanities may be able to reap rich rewards, and that comes from source C. So we've already incorporated a few sources, so we're doing very well. And the kicker is that the sources need to talk to each other. That source F and C are talking to each other, and they're all aligned to the promise of the first premise, right? We're talking about vowels and consonants, adding to the stem, right? So far, so good. And you don't want to go on and on and on in terms of an analysis or a paraphrase. Like we got 10 to 12 sentences. That's it. The rewards derive from the A and account for statements like the following from our nation's elite. MIT biology prepared me for medicine. Literature prepared me to be a doctor. Source E. All right, very cool. So these sources are all talking to each other. So we got 3 sources, all in unison, all under the promise of the first premise. Everything's chit-chatting together. Education in absence of the A breeds a workforce and a collective individual highly incapable of original thought and creativity. Clearly, medical knowledge is requisite, but so is the ability to interpret a patient's account and story, a skill hard to foster and grow without adequate exposure to the A. One thing the diehard STEM pundits overlook is the human touch, an implicit work skill that needs to be taught. All right, so one of the things too that you're seeing here is that the embedded quotes are silky smooth, and there's a little template for that. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words, not exactly, but a minimum of 5 words before their quote and keeps the quote small, it should sound conversational. You may need to bracket along the way. 76% of prospective employees value ethical judgment and integrity, and 63% place a strong value on soft skills, and that comes from source C. All right, we got plenty of support and analysis, and let's go back. Are all those quotes and paraphrases germane to the promise of the first premise? Are we talking about the vowels and the consonants needed to be further included in STEM to make it worthy of our funding, right? And that's a solid yes. Nothing extraneous comes in here. We do not get waylaid. We do not go off on tangential bird walks. It's all contained here. In the conclusion right here, all right, this is the conclusion of the body paragraph. We have to keep the promise of the first premise and go echo the thesis. We got to tie it all back to the prompt. Everything needs to go back to the prompt. So let's see how we do this. Here's the thing. These skills are not congenital. They are developed and honed when curriculums include a healthy dose of the arts and humanities. As such, STEM initiatives must include a critical vowel. So they forgot a word there. STEM initiatives must include a critical vowel. And I'm assuming that's the A. So all of that took 12 sentences, I think. That's how you do the syllogistic method. So teachers and students often ask, so what do I do next, right? Well, you can go in a million different directions. There's still so many things left to say. So what you do is change your why reason, right? So let's go back here. Change the focus of your why. Change up your quotes and your paraphrases. And again, go 10 to 12 sentences. And you'll notice that in that body paragraph here, students are doing the same things that we were talking about in the introduction. Great sentence variety for voice, rhythm, and flow. Good tier 2 level vocabulary. And you just, kind of wield that and toss that throughout the entirety of your paper. So that's FRQ 1 2022. So many of you know that I got a number of irons in the fire. The big one is that I'm going to be working with the National Writing Project going forward. So I'm a lead teacher, and many of you are familiar with my Teach It Right 5-week mastermind. That is going to be run through the National Writing Project going forward as of August 9th, 2022. So we'll be updating my webpage and their webpage, and it's pretty cool because with their funding and grants and they're bigger than solo operating Christian Coon. We can offer the course for less. Teachers can get their stamp of approval for credit hours, and folks seem to be liking that a whole bunch. So you can get more information on that at my website, teachinghowtowrite.com, www.teachinghowtowrite.com, or you can email me at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. And if you would like these slides, by all means, just email me. Let me know in the subject heading or in the body of the email what you're requesting. So I'm also running a summer short course series. We started with the Word Study Academy, which focused on vocabulary programs, the Nuance Academy, which embraces the teachings of Strunk and White, and we got into voice, rhythm, and flow, how to get students to absolutely master the basics of grammar, punctuation, and syntax, because all of those foundational literacies need to be at play clearly, if you're going to have students write like the exemplars and models in these in this presentation in particular. And then I'm doing AP strategies for success. So 90-minute, 2-hour sessions where we're going to do Lang and Lit. And again, you can get information on my webpage with regards to that. We'll explore in those sessions how my templates can be used to construct all of the FRQs, both Lang and Lit, and I'll equip you with everything you'll need to bring the templates into your classroom and hit the ground running on day one. And then lastly, the brilliant, wonderful men, Tim Freitas and Brandon Abden, and I will be presenting at NCTE in the fall in Anaheim, California. So we'll keep you abreast of that as that date nears. So hope all is well, be well, happy teaching, and happy writing.